So next up is Piper's talk on package management.
All right, I'm going to apologize if this goes weird because I didn't prepare a lot, but
Are you going to be drawing on the board?
I'm going to draw a couple of things on the board, but not a lot.
Ask your one viewer if they want to see the board.
No, it doesn't really. Well,
Sorry, one viewer. Tyler doesn't care about you.
literally one.
Yeah.
It's probably sorry. Okay.
It's on mine.
So, all right. From just for a little bit of history, from like November last year through January or February, myself, Tim Coulter, and I'm going to stop listing names because I'm going to miss people, but like 4 other people who are Yuri, who's part of the Embark framework, some of the Nexus guys who did the Apsis, basically all of the people who have development frameworks, for the most part, came together and hammered out ERC 190. So ERC 190, for those that don't know, is a spec for packaging smart contracts. It's really good, actually. Now, I'm not an objective measurer of this, but what I will say is that we were very thorough. We hit all of the use cases that are even remotely reasonable that we could come up with, which includes like private chain deployments, cross-chain deployments, packages that have deployments for many different chains, packages that have no deployments, and completely deterministic like dependencies, the whole thing. So we were pretty thorough when we made it. So ERC 190 is this way you can package up a contract and ship it around, which is pretty cool. There's a fledgling support and a couple of pieces of software for it. And then we made this thing called ethpm, which is a very dusty, hasn't been taken care of very well since we made it, index of these packages. And ENS provides us with a pretty nice way to do namespacing and things like that. ENS was like not even alive at the point where we were making this, so there's no ENS integration right now, but we're we're going to get around to kind of revamping this thing. ENS integration is one of the things, which is where some of this takes an interesting turn, because I just did a lot of planning for where my development framework is going and how we're dealing with a problem that's somewhat interesting in development frameworks. So in like traditional software, you develop locally and there's no state in your package. Packages don't have state in normal software land, right? Like you pull the code and the code is the thing. But that doesn't carry for smart contract packages. Smart contract packages are stateful. They can have references to different chains and things like that, and live deployments on different chains. So there's this interesting state problem that shows up. And the simple version of this is that if you're a company who's got a token, then you have a code base, right? And you've got your like token contract, okay? And you deploy it, which we'll just call that deployment V1 anecdotally. Later, you realize there's a bug in it, okay? So you make some code changes and you deploy it again. The thing is that your code may need references back to the initial deployment. So that means that as the development framework, you have to keep not just the address around, because that's not really enough. Because if you really want to be safe, before you let them interact with that address, when they're talking about, I want to talk to my original token, you want to actually maybe recompile the original thing and verify that the bytecode at the address is the actual token contract that they're interacting with. Now, this isn't a giant security concern for local things, but now let's pretend that this is like a third-party package or something like that, and now we actually really do want to verify. So we get this problem where we have to keep around old deployment assets from previous deployments for contracts where the source code may no longer exist in the repository. So that's where ERC-190 comes in. Every time you make a deployment, we can generate a package for you, and now you have a completely packaged up little bundle of your original deployment, all the original code that went into it, how it was compiled. Now you can move on to new compiler versions, but still have all the information to verify the original one. All right, so we're going to segue back over to package indexes here for a second. So right now, ethpm, I don't know, I've got a couple domain names registered, but we're just going to call it ethpm.eth. I'm going to draw a little scribble in here to represent some level of artificial namespacing that we put in between. Maybe this is like free for all, because I kind of don't want to give people top level namespaces for packages yet. But you know, we can imagine somebody registering an owned package, right, and you know, a bunch of other named packages. So when you want to install a package with your favorite framework, you'll do something like truffle install owned.ffa.ethpm.eth. It'll dig in, look up what the latest version is, and install it. That's all nice and well, and now we have a system for installing packages. But what I've realized, and what my plans are that ethpm.eth is not going to be special. What we're going to deploy, hopefully, this is all theoretical plans, is essentially a package index factory that anybody who's got an ENS name can very trivially deploy their own package index and set it up under their ENS name wherever they want, at which point it's really easy for each development team to host their own index of all of their own packages under their ENS name. And that means that when you're doing an ICO launch and somebody wants to interact with your ICO, rather than just giving them your address, you say, cool, our ICO is at v1.ico.mysupertoken.eth. And you know, maybe we need to put like packages in here because that's where they put it or whatever. But the idea is that we can now use ENS as the way that companies can communicate to people. I mean, we're already kind of doing this, but people currently are setting this like as a resolver to an address. And sure, that's great. You can just point them at an address. But if this is a package, if you're actually pointing them at a package in your own local index, then now when you load this into Mu, into their smart contract interface to interact with the ICO, Mu can actually pull the source code for the contracts that you, like, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to manually go verify your contract on Etherscan and go manually verify it on these other places. All you do is point people at your package, and each of the sites like Etherscan and Mu and things like that now have all the information that they need to do the independent verification themselves. And the client can do it on the client side as well. So you don't even have to trust a third-party service to verify things for you. You can verify it yourself. It's a powerful abstraction because one, in like normal software, in like every company I've worked at prior to all this crypto stuff, we were hosting our own PyPy index because we didn't want to trust PyPy, right? And like we're hosting our own all of these things, and it was a giant pain in the ass to do these things because it's not trivial to, I don't know, it's not a straightforward thing to host your own package index. But in this world, it gets really easy for every single company to host their own package index, to have their own namespace using ENS, and to have really safe and verifiable ways to signal to people, this is where you get at our contracts. This is how you get at our stuff. And you, as the company who owns the ENS name, you don't have to trust our package index to host your information. You can use your own that you have full control over. It's your smart contract that you own. And rather than just pointing stuff at names, you're pointing them at these like rich assets that have a lot of power baked into them. So that's what we're looking at doing.
Have you thought about, I'm not sure if this is implicit in what you're saying, You know, like smart contract systems and upgrading without having to change pointers for calls. By basically like saying like, hey, look, I'm gonna call, you know, the smart contract at this address, and then they, you know, they can update to a new version of the smart contract. And you like find a new address.
So the idea is, okay, so this is how you would get at like a specific version, and I'm using V1. This is like a really bad version identifier, but.
So what if you want, can you get the latest version? And is this something that's like somehow you can get it with a call?
Well, that's probably what the resolver here needs to do.
So that's, I was gonna ask.
Is that
Right.
the resolver here is probably the shortcut to whatever the latest version is, because you really don't want that to automatically update.
I'm concerned about automatically updating.
No.
Especially basically if like the interface becomes a subset of the old interface, then or like, you know, somehow the old interface.
So that's a solution that we're not going to solve. That's a solution that you probably solve at a slightly higher level, where you get to determine what the authoritative name is for getting at your contracts. But if people want to get at a specific, they want to lock their version in, that's how they would do it.
So this is, how do I even phrase the question? I don't know what a package index is. Okay, so that's not really the problem. If I'm stuck in old-fashioned thinking, is something, like I imagine getting a package index back is different from getting Ethereum address back.
It is.
Okay, so is there some mechanism that will be signaled to the resolver that says, like the equivalent of a DNS RR type?
So there's the adder resource.
Yeah.
We're going to make an EIP.
So it's a different type of resource.
For a different type of resource.
Okay, so that's.
So it'll probably be the ERC 190 resource, just to be really, because this is not something that's supposed to be user-friendly, it's machine readable.
So it's like, the analogy then is that resources are like the RR types of ENS, in a sense.
I'm not familiar with what RR types are.
So
Like IEC90.
Okay, yes,
So-
yes.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, we're planning on, or whatever, there's a plan, there's a plan to spit out a new resource type, which is package.
This is the kind of stuff like getting into like where I say DNS can go once you're out here like on the block.
Super powerful to have this generic namespacing solution that we can go to.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
And also, just as a side note, this is where the standard library comes into. So the goal is that by blocking out some top-level namespaces, that once we actually have a rich package ecosystem, we'll not open up standard library as a namespace, but create it and start curating things into it. And then if somebody is inclined to, you can just start importing things straight from there, because it's trivial for it to understand how to reach into those things.
This we can go with JSON with specified data, like a binary API.
It's JSON, yeah.
Sorry, however, just to be clear, like if I install V1, ICO, whatever, and I say lock it at that version, it's gonna resolve first and then lock, or is it gonna just save that name? Because the names still feel mutable.
So there's two sort of ways that dependencies are specified, at least in the way that Populous handles packages. There's something akin to like your package JSON file, and it uses name. It looks a lot like a package JSON dependencies, which is essentially name things pinned to versions or version ranges.
Okay.
And that one is where you could specify it in a way that let you.
Right, you could use Semper in the name.
Yeah, and we're pretty strict on Semper right now, but you could get into a specific version or a range to let new people who pull your package down and say install from source, then maybe you get the latest version.
Right.
But anytime you create a package, packages are always pinned to an exact setting.
Here's an idea. Have a version number convention where the first version changes only when the interface changes.
Yeah.
It's like
Semper. You just use that Semper.
Oh, sorry. And you're doing that with, are you doing that with like this
It's like,
That's how it
it's
was
interface breaks, but
Great.
API additions and then bug fixes.
That's awesome, yeah, and these are like, another dot in the name, right?
Yeah, it's up to,
Great.
we just decided not to make a new version spec and to use
That's good, that's
Simber.
super smart.
It's
Yeah.
super, very widely used.
Yeah.
It's great.
Really Python.
I didn't know that's what we were talking about. Just in the context,
Yeah.
somehow.
That is a JSON schema. That's a JSON schema for what a log file looks like. If you go back. Anyways, the ethpms, there's an ethpm organization and an ethpm spec. If you go to ERC 190, I don't know if clever is the right word, but the spec is not actually in ERC 190. ERC 190 just points to the actual spec instead of this as the authority on where it is, so it looks different.
Great, this is where somebody's office.
And my hope is that, and it's not trivial to integrate with it, is that Etherscan and my Ether wallet and other places who present contract interfaces, rather that we can switch from, here, please provide me your source code and tell me what version you compiled with, and that sort of thing, to this is how you verify stuff, is you just need a package for it. I think it'll take a lot of headache off of those verification services as well.
So my question would be, as it relates to like the ENS roadmap, is if this is a new resource type we support, does it make sense to have a generalized resource type, specific resource type, and what other use cases do we have besides ethpm where we might want to consider other resource types or the process for additions of resource types?
I mean, I think EIPs are kind of our established process for generic ecosystem-wide specs. And while if somebody comes along and wants to create the phone number resource type, we should probably have a pretty rigorous process for making sure that we get that right the first time. But we're probably going to namespace ours under something so that it's not even just ERC90 resource, because it doesn't need to be friendly. And we're probably going to namespace it with a V1 also, because we're going to iterate on it. So I think there's sort of just a judgment as the IPs come in for new resource types. It's like, are we likely to collide? No? Okay, then sure.
And the way the EAPS process works is like, it kind of depends how much support you get from other people thinking it's a good idea, or enough, whether it's enough to get the peer review to bring it to a certain level of quality before.
Any other questions for Piper?
Does this work for non-solidity too? Like, could I
Yeah,
install?
it's generic. There's not a, it's not solidity.
It's just arbitrary files,
This
basically.
spec is not solidity.
Right, it just has good features for linking together other or blockchain-based resources. Right, cool, that's great.
Do you have a plan to provide this as like a utility, like to anyone,
What do you mean?
publicly? You mentioned that you want people to do it themselves, but also that you're gonna have a standard library thing.
So standard library is like EVM standard library. Utility piece, Tim and I have struggled with Tim Coulter, Truffle author. We've talked a lot about why we are pretty sure that we're still a long ways from having a generic EVM install command, because both of us have to write our own EPM integration into our frameworks. So for right now, it's looking a lot like development frameworks have to also be your package management solution, because they're so integrated with stateful, locally deployed assets and things like that. There's like a really, we just don't know where to draw the line yet. And wherever we do draw the line, we have to have agreed very clearly at everything below the line what the.
Can't the line use just some command line arguments?
No, because it's incredibly, it's a complex problem.
Okay.
It really is a.
So a simple line would just say dash dash like Ethereum, and then it knows to put it on mainnet, and then like to only look at mainnet.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's not a.
We've been looking for what to name the flag. Nick, what's the next one?
Yep,